Welcome to the Center for Creative Leadership webinar, Building More Resilient Leadership for Greater Impact, presented by Jessica Glazer of the Center for Creative Leadership, also known as CCL. I'm Tracy Dobbins, and I'll be your CCL webinar host today. If you're just getting to know us, CCL is a top-ranked provider of executive education globally. We work with two-thirds of the world's top 500 organizations, providing innovative solutions for the entire organization and programs proven to transform the individual. Our work is based on significant research from our own elite teams to the finest global sources, and we share it readily with you today in this discussion. I'm pleased to have with us today Jessica Glazer, who is a Leadership Solutions Partner and Executive Coach at the Center for Creative Leadership. Jessica helps to develop large-scale, innovative custom learning journeys for corporate and government partners and designs and delivers programs for all levels from the C-suite to individual contributors. She also works as the East Coast lead for open enrollment programs tailored to the needs of first-time managers. In her work as a public speaker, Jessica has delivered programs on 4 continents. Her areas of specialty include positive psychology, holistic leadership, and coaching. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you so much, Tracy. I'm excited to be here with you, and I'm excited to be with all of our participants today. I wanted to share a few things before we get started officially. The first is that you may hear that I have a little bit of a cold. And so today is a practice in resilience for myself as well. And I apologize for not sounding like Kathleen Turner when I'm sick as much as I wish I did. We also, I'm right now going to send out to all participants my email address. And so I wanted to start with that because as we talk about some of the topics that we'll get to today, I know that that can bring up for many people a lot of questions that might feel more personal than something you'd wish to share in a large forum like this, and maybe something will marinate, and tomorrow you'll have a question. And so at any point in the future, please feel free to shoot me an email there at that email address. I'll also have that up on the screen at the end of our session today. And the last thing I wanted to share is that while we will talk about a number of resilience practices, we are going to be sharing a number of things that may sound like something you do already, and that's great. It might sound like something you would want to try, and that's also cool. And you may hear something and you think, oh my gosh, I never want to do this. This sounds like the worst idea I've ever heard. I would just ask that as we go through the session that you pay attention to that kind of feeling. So if you find that you really are bristling at something, maybe give it a try. Do one of the small things that we talk about today, because we're going to talk about a number of practices that can be accomplished, all of them today, in 2 to 20 minutes. So the things that we talk about are going to be things that you can implement very quickly into your day for yourself and with your team. And when I say team, that's the last thing I wanted to share. When I talk about a team, that can be a team in any sense. So that can be your team at work, and certainly a lot of people will be viewing this through that lens. And it can also be your team at home. That could be a team of a board of directors that you serve on, or a literal sports team that you are a part of or that you help to coach. So all of the practices that we talk about will apply both individually and also for a team setting. And so I'd invite you to think about team in that broader sense. So I see a few questions about people's audio. If you have specific questions, I would invite you to share that with webinar host or all panelists so that our colleague Regina can help you triage that as quickly as possible. All right, so let's get started. I like to start with this quote: go into the world and do well, but more importantly, go into the world and do good. We talk a lot about being successful as an organization, being successful as an individual, and we don't often talk about potential. What is the untapped potential that we might be leaving on the table, and what could we be doing to increase our potential in terms of how we can create good for ourselves and for the people in our lives? And so that's something to just keep in mind as we move forward. We're going to talk today about building more resilient leadership for greater impact, really using leadership as a framework, but how do you undergird your leadership through building resilience? And we're going to do that with this agenda. We're going to talk through briefly where we've applied this before. We'll talk about why resilience is important, and then we're going to do a fairly broad overview of 5 areas of resilience that we have found to be very important through years of research in this area. We'll close the session. We'll have a nice little Q&A with Tracy at the end. And again, I invite you to use that email and shoot me any questions that you might have moving forward. All right, so a quick welcome. I'm Jessica Glazer. I sit here in our Greensboro headquarters with my colleague Tracy and a number of our colleagues here at CCL. And this work is based on research from the center and also research from years within the fields of business, psychology, and what is known often as positive psychology. And that is a topic that I've been fortunate to teach at a number of large institutions, both in psychology departments, but also in business schools. And this is also something, because a lot of this can bring up questions in areas of our personal life, that I've applied as a mental health counselor at the Shepherd Pratt hospital system. And so these are areas that we would invite you to think about and to really apply all of these practices in all of the areas of your life. This is not a siloed business area. This is really a holistic concept. And so when we're talking about this concept, resilience, what I'd like to start by doing is asking you to think of yourself at your worst at work. And so if you would be so kind as to share with all participants in the chat box, what do you feel when you feel like this child here on the screen? What do you feel when you're at the end of a long, hard day, nothing's going your way? What comes to mind when you see this photo? Well, defeated, exhausted, emotional, frustrated. Oh, I get snippy and I disengage, says Kat. Yeah, we see a lot of frustrated here, overwhelmed, impatient, unforgiving. I mean, these are not necessarily what you'd probably be writing in if I said, tell me about what does the best leader look like, right? And then at the same time, we very much understand what it feels like to feel like this. We're getting so many responses so quickly that I don't think that this is a foreign concept to a lot of people. This is something that we're probably more intimately familiar with than we'd like to allow. And then I'm going to switch to another screen. You can keep writing in, but hopefully the words will change. I really like, Kat wrote, the ability to avoid baked goods goes out the window. Bye-bye, says Anthony. And so that's one way that we might feel. And then if we look at the other end of the spectrum, we might feel something like this. So I'd invite you to think of a time when you were at your best at work, when you were in the zone, you felt joy at work. What comes to mind there? Happily, these are very different. We see killing it, inspired, relaxed, accomplished, yes, with many exclamation points. I really like this. John Watson said, connected to mission and purpose. Yes, absolutely. And I see a lot of exclamation points here. I like Christine called out other focused, and that's very interesting, and we'll actually get to that. So come back to that soon. And we'll end here for my call outs with Cheryl's cowabunga. Yeah, we feel like cowabunga, and everyone has felt like this as well. But sometimes we have a little bit of a challenge because we know what it feels like to feel like both of these photos, but a lot of times we don't know how to go from feeling like the photo on the left to feeling like the photo on the right. And perhaps more dangerously, we often don't know when we're about to feel like that crying child. Everything just suddenly feels too overwhelming and we might snap. It's like having a toddler that suddenly everything is fine and then all of a sudden we're in hysterics. And that's a very real feeling. All of a sudden we might feel we're in control and then we're not. What we're going to talk about today is both how do we go from feeling like one to the other, and perhaps most importantly, how do we try to avoid feeling like the photo on the left in the first place? Now, the reason this is important is because stress is an epidemic. The World Health Organization has defined stress and called out stress as the health epidemic of the 21st century. And that's because it has significant downstream effects on us mentally, emotionally, physically, and that really impacts us personally and professionally, and that's why we can't really extricate the two. When we're looking at leadership, many of you are familiar with the work that we do here at the center. We often talk about a phrase called VUCA, and that's a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. That comes from research from the military when they were trying to do strategy work. And when you're trying to do strategy work, which everyone would allow for is very important in leadership, it's very difficult because we live live in a VUCA world. It's volatile, it's complex, we don't know exactly what's going to happen next, and there's not a day any of us have where that's not the case. No one's ever going to have a day that's not a VUCA day, but how do we still prepare ourselves best for our days, for our years ahead, especially as leaders when we are trying to help support teams, organizations, families? So when we talk about resilience, it's very important. We're going to use Andrew Zolli's definition here, and that's the capacity of a system, enterprise, or individual to maintain core purpose and integrity in the face of dramatically changed circumstances. Dramatically changed circumstances could look like a lot of different things. We'll talk about that in a moment, but that can be something that's minor that still makes us feel like crying, or something that's major that just puts us sort of into shock for a little bit of time. Now, we're all connected here today through devices, right? And that's really a wonderful thing. I'm actually surrounded by devices right now. And if you asked me, or if I asked everyone on the call, without looking at one of your devices, you tell me, if I needed you to be using this device for the next 3 hours, would you need to plug in? There's a really good chance you would know. You would know where you are. If I asked you about your phone battery and I said, how much phone battery do you have? Maybe it's morning for somebody and they think, well, you know, every time I drive in and I listen to a podcast, I know that I use up 20% of my battery. We're very attuned to our batteries for our devices. Unfortunately, we're not as attuned to our own internal batteries. And so when we think about, do I need to plug in? How far away am I? We don't get necessarily an overt warning sign that comes up and says 10% battery left. You know, it would be great if we did. And actually, if we start to practice some of these things, we can become more attuned to our personal warning signs. But most of the time, we ignore those and we kind of run ourselves down into the ground. And so when we're talking about resilience today, we're really talking about plugging your brain in, connecting your brain into getting more battery life, to connecting it into getting more energy and resilience. Now, when we used to live in stressful times, not that long ago, it wasn't that long ago that I had a beeper, and I thought I was the coolest college student in the world, and it wasn't that long ago that it was really an amazing thing to even have a home computer. It wasn't that long ago as well that a stressful experience might look like what you see here on the screen. And if you have a stressful experience with this fellow here on the left of the screen, that's a short-lived experience. So you might come across this lovely face here and run away and not go back to that area of the lion's den. And hopefully that's a quick, easy to manage stress experience. On the other hand, you might find that this fellow wins in this fight. And again, that's a pretty quick stress experience. Now, when that's what our brains have been conditioned as human beings to perceive as a stress experience, it means that when we're having today's stressful experiences, and that might look something like this, might look like just a never-ending inbox that you cannot get control over. It might look like this. It might mean that you try to get home and suddenly every road that you could think to possibly take, every road that exists for your commute is red on your map home. Or it might look like this, just deadlines that never seem to go away. When these are stressful experiences, what it means is that the hormones that we experience in a fight or flight situation that are meant to just come quickly into our brain and dissipate stay for much longer periods of time. When that happens, we are having an influx of what's called chronic cortisol. Cortisol is that hormone, and it kills our brain cells, and it means that we're not communicating as effectively as we might like with ourselves. It interferes with all of the things you see here on the right: problem solving, concentration, mood, and memory. If you find that you can't find your keys when you're having the worst day of the week, that's not the world conspiring against you. That's your brain not able to process and remember certain things. So there are things that we want to keep in mind. But all of these things here, memory, mood, problem-solving, focus, add up ultimately to performance, and specifically leadership performance. Now, we've just started, and I've shared a number of not great news with you, but the good news is that our brains can flex, adapt, and grow. Essentially, we're building new habits just as we would build a new road, paving over it over and over. And this is called neuroplasticity. It means that our brain can change its function, its structure through experience. We talk about not being able to teach old dogs new tricks, but the fact is you can teach any dog new tricks. The dog just has to want to learn and to keep practicing. So what we're going to talk about today is not just plugging your brain in, but essentially giving it boxing gloves so that prophylactically you're prepared for a VUCA world, and when things don't go your way, you're able to fight back. So to do this, we're going to look at 5 areas of resilience. And some of the areas are going to sound very familiar to you, as I've said. Some of the areas might be new for you. And 2 of them, the first 2, we're going to go through pretty quickly. It's very hard to not be familiar with them in today's world. So we're going to look at these as sort of battery building opportunities. Again, you can do these in some of them as quick as 30 seconds, and some of them will take about 26 whole minutes of your day. What I do want to point out is that we'll put them in order, but I don't want anyone to think that if you can't do one, you can't do the others. So some of this will work very well genetically. If you wanted to start with the first and carry on to the last, you'd probably do well for it. And we know that that's not always possible. So this is for you to pick and choose. If one of these things resonates with you today, we're very happy to hear it. So the first 2, as I said, are ones you're probably familiar with, and those are sleep and exercise. It's hard to get on any flight these days and not see something about one of these 2 topics in the in-flight magazine. So we're not going to belabor it. What we will do is share some information with you that might be new and that might resonate in terms of sharing this with your team. So first we're going to talk about sleep. And just even seeing this photo here kind of makes me a little bit drowsy. You know, it can be hard even when we teach about this for 15 years to get enough sleep. We all are very busy. But when we're not getting enough sleep, we have diminished skills that are really essential to leadership. So when we talk about leadership here at CCL, we often talk about creativity, about motivation, about building relationships. But those all go out the window when we're overtired and we are having trouble emotionally regulating, paying attention, or keeping things just in our memory. Decision making. If you get home at the end of the day and it's been a long day and you didn't get enough sleep, and someone says, well, what's for dinner? And you think, I cannot make another decision. That's not just because you're incapable of choosing, whether or not you want to order pizza or tacos. That's probably because you are just overtired. Now, when we are not getting enough sleep, we have an increase in things that we don't often think of as very good things. Anxiety, sedentary behavior and smoking, depression increases, our impulsive behavior increases. And when we look at what our research shows here at CCL about good leadership, this follows that we want to be having an increase in the diminished column and the converse for the other column. Now, when we're looking at not getting enough sleep, and most of us find that we aren't, and we'll talk about that in a moment, what we find is that every hour of sleep that someone loses, they're losing an IQ point. And if we're not getting sleep again, we can only replenish it that way. Now, I will share that one time I shared this statistic with a large group. I stayed around for a while having some conversations post-session, and there was one person sort of hanging around in the corner who came to approach me and said very quietly, is that cumulative? So I can tell you that no, it's not a cumulative thing. It's day by day. I don't know where they thought their IQ was starting. Apparently very, very high. They look very, very concerned. But no, it is not. It's not a cumulative issue. But the good news is that if we do get more sleep, we can replenish that. What is really staggering to me here about Corin's work is what he points out here about the collective IQ. When you think about how often you say to someone, how are you? And they say, I am tired. Or someone asks you how you're doing, and you say, I feel really tired today. You think about the collective IQ of your organization and how that is compromised. When you look at your team, if they're all missing hours of sleep and the work that you're doing depends on them to be aware, alert, really productive, that becomes a danger to our organization. Now, the other thing that's a danger is that when we're not getting enough sleep, the part of our brain that sort of keeps us in check also turns off. So we sort of start to function on what's most necessary for us. How do we stay awake? How do we not trip? And we don't really focus on how am I doing? And so we think we're doing very well, but we're actually not performing as well as we'd like. And so the part of your brain that might say, stop talking in this meeting, isn't really working as well as you might hope on that Tuesday morning when you pulled an all-nighter. But how much is enough? If I ask the group, we'd probably see a big split. Often when we ask this of CCL participants, we see a number of ranges here. So I'll invite you right now for all participants, if you'd like to write in your average number of sleep. How much sleep are you generally getting? Are you getting, and you can do a range 4 to 5, 5 to 6, 6 to 7. Yeah, we see a pretty good split. We have 8 babies. Someone wrote in, and I'm going to guess that this is an area that they feel they can check the box for. We do have a number that are 5 to 6. We have some 9. That's awesome. Some people are in bed for longer and sleeping for less. But yeah, there's a very big range here. And what's interesting is that we could probably map this here on a bell curve for what we've reported. But what we know from research is that people really, to do their best on average, need to be getting about 7 to 8. And so whatever you can do to make that happen or to get closer to that, the better. Now, there are many reasons why people might not get enough sleep. Sometimes people are caring for family members. Sometimes people are caring for children. Sometimes people have physical ailments that are making it difficult for them to sleep, or there are just things that are nagging at them. And there are a number of ways that if we were having a full sleep session, we could talk about that. But there are also some really easy ways if there's not something that's an outstanding reason you might want to discuss, say, with a doctor. There are things that we can just do to increase our sleep, what we call routines and hygienes. We can get into bed earlier. We can wake up later. I'm a snooze button lover, but what that means is that I'm not getting those last 20 minutes of sleep. I'm just sitting there slapping my phone. And so what we can try to do is actually set our phone for those 20 minutes later, and now we've found 20 minutes. And we just know that when it rings, we've gotten those 20 minutes already, and we're going to get up out of bed. Getting alcoholic drinks into your system earlier can help to avoid disrupted sleep. I see a lot of people wrote about that. And then rituals, like a pre-bed list if you want to sort of exorcise all of your anxious thoughts, or a warm shower. And finally, minimizing your screen time. Happily, technology's caught up with this, and you can actually set your phone to shut off its blue light after a certain time. What I'd encourage you to do is think about where you can find an extra 20 minutes. I see a number of questions coming in. We are making note of those. And so if we don't get to those at the end of the session, please feel free to shoot me an email, or we can send you some information about this. Now, if getting sleep at night is very challenging, and certainly it can be, what I'd also offer is that naps offer a really beautiful and elegant solution. NASA found that pilots who took a 26-minute nap improved their alertness by 54% and their performance by 34%. Now, we have to travel a lot here in our work at the center, and I would be very, very happy to wait 26 minutes on the runway for a pilot who is 54% more alert with 34% better performance. I like Robert Sutton's quote here, "The world would be a better place if people slept more and took naps." Now, napping is not always possible at work, but sometimes it is. You can maybe run out to your car. You could try to shut your door. You could do a George Costanza-style bed under your desk, but I would recommend sharing that with people and not having a George Costanza-style end to your career. But there's a lot of different things that you can do. And if you want to think of your team as well as your family at home, what you might want to do is come home and take a quick nap so that you can give of yourself to your family for the rest of your waking hours without getting so tired or getting so much sleep that you can't go to bed at night. Now, we covered sleep briefly, but there is so much literature out there on this, and often when people aren't getting enough sleep, there are challenges there. The same holds for exercise. So we're going to talk even faster about exercise, and I'm just going to share a little bit about it. We all know that it's important. We all know that it can help us, and a lot of times we feel that there's not time for it. But what I would offer is that we've talked about stress that we can't avoid killing brain cells. What exercise can actually do is stimulate the growth of new brain cells, and that's fairly phenomenal. If you talk to Tal Ben-Shahar, who's one of the leading researchers in positive psychology, he talks about sleep and exercise together as a magic pill. That if someone gave you a magic pill to have higher performance, better leadership, just a healthier life, would you take that pill every day? And I don't know many who wouldn't, but that can be found often in sleep and in exercise. John Rady at Harvard calls it miracle grow for the brain. And what Kelly McGonigal has found is that even 5 minutes of what's known as green exercise, and I'll speak to that in a moment, can decrease stress, enhance your focus, boost self-control, all really good things, especially around 2, 3 in the afternoon when we might find that we're lagging, that we need another cup of coffee, that we're just really, we've had it and we're counting down the hours for the day. What green exercise means is that we're outside and we're around greenery. Now, that can be hard this time of year, but even here in North Carolina, where most of the trees are bare, we do have some evergreens. We're just walking outside in nature, hearing the crunch of the grass under your feet, just getting outdoors for a brief moment. All of this is really important for us, and what it can do is really help us very quickly to have that return. That's a very big return on investment, 5 minutes. And you don't need to go and hit the treadmill at the office gym to have that benefit. What she's found is that lower intensity exercise has stronger immediate effects. Now again, this does not negate the recommendation to get 30 minutes of exercise 5 times a day, and we know that that's not always possible. You might be on the road, you might be having a hard time, but there's a lot of things that you can do. I see that people are writing in a number of ideas, and so I'll share with you some of the ones that we have. Someone said a 30-minute, you scheduled a 30-minute walk after the session. That's fantastic. Michelle likes to do mall walking. An underdesk bike Melissa has. I wonder, Melissa, if you're riding right now, and that would be very cool. You're doing double duty. She is. Terrific. For yourself, what I'd recommend is aiming for 20 minutes more of sleep per night. And that can be, again, through a nap, or that could be by setting your snooze alarm in a realistic manner, or getting outside for short bursts of green exercise every day. Now, since this is the Center for Creative Leadership and we want to think about how we can do well for the people around us, encourage physical activity. If you don't have to do work around a table, have a walking meeting. Walking side by side abreast can really create a different dynamic for your meetings, especially if you have to talk about something that might seem contentious. Avoid emailing people late at night. Even if you write back and say, I don't expect a response, people are likely going to want to mirror your behavior, especially if you were the boss. So try to mirror that by shutting down your own computer at 11 and letting people know that you're doing that. And be cognizant of early, late meetings for colleagues in different locations. Sometimes we think, 8 o'clock works for everybody, and we don't realize that for our remote colleague on the West Coast, that might be a much earlier time than they'd like to be getting up, and that can be a big problem. So there are a lot of great, I'd encourage you to check the chat column here because there are so many wonderful responses. We want to make sure that we're maximizing your time at lunch today. So I'm not going to be able to call all of them out, but they're really heartening. So I'd encourage you to scroll through that as we get into the topic of mindfulness, ironically. So we're going to look at our third area, and that's mindfulness. Now, when I talk about mindfulness, I like to start with this quote: a man is but the product of his thoughts. What he thinks, he becomes. And that's Gandhi. We might think we can't do much to improve on Gandhi quotes, but I'll do you one better. A person is but the product of their thoughts and what they think they become. So we're going to make that a little bit more broadly applicable. But when we think about that, we really do have a lot more control over our thoughts than we might realize. Now, our colleague here at the center talks about the difference between pressure versus stress. And this is Nick Petrie's work, and many of you might be familiar with it. If you're not, I'd encourage you to check it out, and I'm going to put his name right here. We have his white papers available on our website. But what he talks about is pressure not equaling stress. So if you would, what is the difference there? What do you see as the difference? Why might I put that there? So you can put that in the chat box. What's the difference between pressure and stress? Yeah, pressure can definitely give us an edge to meet our goals. Perception, pressure is force. I really like that. And I know that someone, it's going so quickly, I can't actually give an attribution. Marla. Marla wrote internal, external, and I'm actually going to go with that. I see a couple people wrote that as well. And so I'm seeing that coming up quite a bit. And so we'll talk about that because that's really where Nick's coming from. What he talks about is that pressure is an external force. Pressure is a deadline. Pressure is a fact that we may or may not like that is putting some type of force on our health or our time constraints or just whatever situation that we're in. There's that external pressure. But stress is how we internalize that. Now, we can see stress as what some people have written here, that stress can be a way that really motivates us, something that helps us. But as April wrote, stress can also include worry and ruminating. And when we are looking at that when we're looking at stress in that way, that can be really detrimental to us. That means that we're having a cortisol influx. We're not seeing it as a positive thing. We're seeing that as a bad and negative thing happening to us. And so if you could even do this after this call, if you could think the next time someone says, how are you? And you think, gosh, I'm stressed. Or you say, I'm feeling so stressed. If you were able to stop and think, am I stressed or am I under pressure? That's mindfulness. That alone is mindfulness. You don't even need to do a whole lot more. Sometimes people think, oh, mindfulness is that part of yoga where the guy next to me breathes for too long and it's very uncomfortable. And sometimes we have negative views when we think about what mindfulness can be. But mindfulness can be as simple and elegant as doing what Nick recommends, separating pressure and stress. Now, that's really broadly what John Kabat-Zinn, the grandfather of modern mindfulness, calls affectionate attention. Just being nicer to your thoughts, being nicer to yourself through your thoughts. And if you've not read his book, Dan Harris has written a wonderful book called 10% Happier, in which he has the quote, "Mindfulness is the ability to know what's going on in your head without taking the bait and acting on it." It's just really getting more in control of a VUCA mind. We don't just live in a VUCA world. We are constantly immersed in our own VUCA experience. Now, mindfulness has 3 things that it really helps us to do, and we're going to quickly go through all of them. One is that it helps us to stay in the here and now. Now, our brain time travels all of the time. We're here, we're on this webinar, and I just mentioned yoga class. Someone on this call probably thought, I went to a yoga class 3 weeks ago and I had a great time. I should probably sign up again. Let me think about that. Okay, I need to make a note that today I'm going to sign up and go and see what yoga classes are available, and I wonder if I'll like it. And they're not really here. They're sitting in the same spot. They have the same phone against their head, but now they're in the future. They're thinking about what yoga class is going to be like. And someone else is thinking, oh, she talked about that guy breathing, and I don't like that person. I didn't really like that experience. And now we've time traveled to the past. Now, the thing about that is leadership happens in the here and now, and this is work that our colleague Kathleen Clorkin does here at the center. She focuses a lot on this area, on leadership happening in the here and now. And her work is available as well through our website, and she's written a number of studies and white papers for the center. She's one of our senior researchers, and she talks about leadership happening in the here and now. You have to be aware of what's happened before. You need to pay attention and strategize about the future. But if you don't stay present in the moment, you miss all of the things that CCL research shows are most instrumental for leadership. Leadership at its essence is getting things done with and through others. And it's very hard to do that if we're not in the present moment with the people around us. Now, this is very hard to do because our brain is naturally inclined to have downward spirals. When something bad happens, maybe we have a bad interaction at 9 a.m., we have a stress appraisal process that sort of sends us down through tunnel vision. And someone asks us how our day is going, and we think, gosh, and someone asks for that, I'll put Kat Clerkin's name in there, Shannon. We think, oh my gosh, this day is terrible. I had that bad interaction at 9 a.m. and maybe we go to lunch and someone said, how's your day going? Well, it's okay, except for that bad interaction. And we start to get more and more tunneled vision. Our attention narrows. Now, this seems really hard to get off of, and it can be. What ends up happening often is we can close and really only focus on the negative. And this isn't just for a bad interaction. This could be a breakup. This could be a car accident, hopefully where there's not been injury, but we just think, I was so stupid, and we can't get past it. It can feel like we're on a water slide, but the good news is that actually we're not on a water slide. We can stop ourselves and shoot upwards. And when we do that, we experience what Barbara Fredrickson, one of our previous board of directors members here at the center, does her research on, and that's called broadening and building. Essentially, you are opening up your mind, you're opening up your aperture, and you're really having positive reappraisal. The way that I do this is I try to interrupt my broadcast. So what I would recommend as leaders is prepare for the fact that you're going to have that downward spiral at some point, maybe today, maybe in the week. There's a lot of things that you can do. Anthony, you're one step ahead of us, and we're about to get to that, so hold that thought. What you want to do, though, is interrupt your broadcast. The way I do that often is play with or look at photos of one of my dogs. Here's Ollie here. He looks very adorable. And if I really need an extra push, sometimes I dress Ollie up like Where's Waldo, and we give out candy to the children on Halloween, or I look at this photo, and it's something that just helps put me in a good mood. I can't look at this photo and not laugh, remembering how he sat there with an open doorway for hours on end to give candy to our new neighbors' kids. And so whatever it is for you, it could be a photo of a grandchild, it could be a photo of a recent vacation you've gone on. Have things available that you can immediately rely on so that you can spin upwards as well. Mindfulness also helps us to disengage from autopilot. And so I'm going to share with you a study that's probably one of my favorite studies, and truly a study that I don't go a day without thinking about. And this has now been I think I learned about the study in 2005, and I don't think I've gone a day without thinking back to it. And it was a study that was done at Cornell University on a campus, and I'm going to show you what that looked like. They decided to approach random pedestrians, and so a lost person who was really a researcher was holding a map and came up to a random pedestrian and said, "Excuse me, how do I get to such and such a building?" And this was a building that really everyone on campus we could assume that they knew how to get to. And so the researcher asked for directions, and the person said, "Sure, happy to do that." And as they were giving directions, two people walked through right between them holding a very large opaque door and burst through very rudely. "Pardon us, coming through, excuse us, coming through." And the person standing there with the map said, "Excuse me, what a rude interruption. So what were you saying?" The pedestrian continued to give the directions, and then they broke and moved along. What the random pedestrian didn't realize was that it wasn't just one person stopping them. And what we knew in the study was that it wasn't just one person part of the study. There were 4 people who were part of the study. There was a random pedestrian stopped by someone holding a map. 2 people walked through holding a door, and the door obscured a 4th person. And that person was known as a switch. And as they walked through, the switch switched places with the person holding the map and took the map from them. And as the people with the door passed, so did the original person holding the map. So then we have the people with the door pass through, the original person with the map pass through, and a new person standing there holding a map saying, "What a rude interruption. So as you were saying, please give me the directions." How many people, the random pedestrians, do you think noticed the change? We have some answers here, so you can choose from those. Was it 25%, 38, 47, 55, 69? I like to call this part of the program, how much faith do you have in your fellow human beings? Some people are saying less than 25. Some people are saying 38. Some people are saying 55. Some people say 69. We have a big split here. When they ran the study the first time, they found that 47% of people noticed the change. Now, it looks like, probably you were a little bit primed, and maybe you thought, my gosh, no one would have noticed. But hopefully you would think if a new person was standing in front of you moments later, you might notice. Well, the researchers were startled, and they thought, 47%, my gosh, people must be more aware. Let's run it again. So they ran it again. And this time only 33% of people noticed the change. And what they attributed this to was something called change blindness. And this is why I think about this every day. Change blindness is our tendency to focus so much on task that we miss all of the things around us. Now, this was a simple task. It was giving a stranger directions to a building that everybody on that campus knows how to find. That's not a big task. That's not a high-risk task. It's not high stakes. It's not like probably that's much lower impact than probably every decision that you have made today or will have to make today. And still, only 47% and then 33% noticed that a different human being was standing in front of them. So I'd ask you to consider is if you were 5%, which is very little, just 5% more present in your day, what might you notice at work, at home, or about yourself? What might change for you about your awareness in these 3 areas? And people are already writing in, so that's fantastic. So if you feel comfortable, please share. Some people wrote appreciation. Julia said, my shoulders are too tense. Yeah, so we can start to realize that actually this might be the right time. If I'm Julia and my shoulders are feeling tense and I'm 5% more aware, this is the right time for me to get up and get that green exercise. I see that Cheryl wrote blessings. Yeah, we might just be aware more of what we should be grateful for. Janae wrote, how much I love my family. Or I love, Ladreka wrote, when my kids really need my attention. Yes, when you think about being at home, when we come home to children or to other family members, it can really be easy to get very task-oriented. Have you done your homework? Have you eaten enough food so you're not going to wake up in the middle of the night hungry? Have you brushed your teeth? I don't see that your toothbrush is wet. These are really strong tasks that can help us to forget that we might want to ask how the day went. What did you learn in science? Did you get to make up with your friend? What's going on? And that can apply to our teams at work as well. So did I have small talk with my team, as Radha wrote, right? Am I aware of what's going on? Did I miss someone's birthday? Did I even send out a holiday note to my team and let them know that I appreciated the work that they did in 2019? There's a lot that we might be missing. And when we think about ourselves, we might be missing that we are about to feel like that crying child. We might be ignoring the fact that our battery is about to go down to 0, and it's going to be really hard to plug in if it's 1 p.m. and we're in the middle of a meeting. So what I'd invite you to do is think about that 5%. And finally, mindfulness can help us to focus. Now, we are often and always multitasking. It's almost a joke to ask people who does. I'm not going to ask you to write in because I'm going to assume we all do. We're encouraged to in many ways. But what I will share is this one snippet. The IQ, we talked about IQ earlier, the IQ of those who try to juggle messages and work. When you have a pop-up at the corner of your screen telling you that you have an email, your IQ will fall by 10 points. And that's equivalent to missing an entire night of sleep or to being inebriated. It's more than double that of being inebriated. That's really significant. And so you've probably heard you should shut your notifications. It's not good for you. We know that it increases your heart rate. It can take hours for it to go down after you stop those pop-ups. I would really suggest that you stop it. Even if you set an alarm every hour, every 30 minutes to check, whatever you can do to manage that and keep your IQ at the best that it can be. But we really want to try to avoid multitasking. And if you can't, if you're on call as a doctor, if you are working in a global environment and it's just not possible right now, what you can also try to do is take short breathing breaks. I highly recommend the Calm app. They have probably the easiest meditation you can do, which is just a circle, and it tells you when to breathe in and when to breathe out. And you can set it for a duration of 1 minute to an infinite amount of time, and you can just count your breathing. Looks like a number of people already have the Calm app, and that's terrific. So try that. Try 30 or 60-second breaks. Try just, taking a deep breath. And if you don't want to download an app or you've avoided smartphones somehow, good for you. What you can do is just set an alarm or just take 4 breaths in and 4 breaths out. Setting reminders to be mindful can be helpful. Just a quick Post-it in your cubicle that says breathe, or a decision that every time you stop at a red light, you're just going to take a breath in and a breath out. Make sure you're breathing from your belly, that you're not moving your shoulders up and down. As far as I know, we all have lungs in our abdomen, not in our shoulders, and we don't want to set ourselves into a panic mode. But with your teams, you can do this as well. You can actually start meetings with a breathing break. We run from meeting to meeting. If you want to get people in and out faster, you want them to focus, share mindfulness techniques. Say, hey, I know that we've had a long day. Let's all take 3 deep breaths in and out, and then we're going to try to get 15 minutes back at the end of this hour because we're just going to focus on what we're doing here. Let's shut our laptops. Let's not do email. Let's not multitask. Let's just try to get through this meeting as quickly as possible. When that's not possible, you want to try to provide some type of intermission. So if this was going more than an hour and a half, our session, we would have had an intermission as well. And then encourage breaks as brain boosters. If you see someone getting up from their desk and taking a break, try to encourage that. Clearly, if they're not getting their work done, that's a separate issue. But if people are meeting their deadlines, if people are doing the work that they need to do, encourage that they take breaks that are going to help them to perform as best as possible. So we have 1.5 more areas to get to, and that's because there's one that I'm going to give you a recommendation for, and the other one is certainly a full topic, but it's one that I will leave to you to figure out how to implement. Now, a number of people mentioned gratitude. I think it was Anthony, if I'm correct, and I can't see him scrolling up, but I can't tell. But I think Anthony mentioned gratitude journals, and we'll get to that in a minute. But first, what do you see here on the screen? What is on your screen right now? A face. Face. A lot of people are seeing a face. Those are rocks. I know, it can be late in the day. All right, maybe we need a breathing break. All right, what do you see here? A man blowing wind. Animal on a face. Moana. Ice. An iceberg, a waterfall. Crying face. The spirit of winter. Wow. Wow, Shannon, that was really deep. I really like that. I never heard that one before. Now, these look like faces, but one is a rock formation and one is an ice flow. And the reason that you see a face is because your brain is built to see a face. Children are born looking for faces. We look for faces. So if you look over at the outlet and you think it's smiling at you, or you think the fire hydrant is crying, you're not crazy. Your brain is looking for human faces. And that's how we have survived as a race. And so we are a social animal. Even if you've come to a CCL course, and if you haven't, we'd love to have you, but we often will do work on something called the FIRO-B. We might talk about how involved you like to be with people. You might have a very small social circle, but what we know is that your resilience can be dramatically increased or diminished by how much quality and consistency you have in your social interaction. Now, the challenge here becomes that a lot of times, not just with our teams at work, but sometimes our teams at home, we are much more prolific at complaints than we are at gratitude. The thing about that, though, is that gratitude makes us nicer and deepens our relationships. Robert Emmons has done tremendous work in this area, if this is of interest to you. And what has also been found is it doesn't only make us more trusting, more social, more appreciative, but it generates social capital. We get more return on our investment if we're grateful, and we don't even necessarily need to share it with people. If we keep a gratitude journal, that can help us. We can sleep better. Some people mentioned that when we were talking about getting more sleep. It can put us in a more positive mood, and we can feel more connected to others. Now, the dividends increase exponentially when we write it down and share it with people. Now, these don't need to be odes to someone. You don't need to write it in iambic pentameter and stamp it, and handwrite it. These can be concrete, specific, not too long emails. So what I would encourage you to do if you want to try this out is give yourself 3 minutes. Some people are going to take a walk after this call, and that's terrific. What I would recommend as well is putting 3 minutes on the clock. You're already seated. Open up a new email screen and send a quick gratitude note and use our SBI model of feedback. And you're probably familiar with this if you're familiar with CCL's work on feedback. What was the situation? What was the behavior that made you grateful? And what was the impact? That's all you need to do. Send it. Do it right away. Do it very quickly. See how fast you can do it. Someone wrote, Anthony wrote, catch people doing something right. Sarah says, add one item she's grateful for on her daily agenda in pink ink. Whatever works for you, if you can share it with people, even better. Set a timer very quickly and consider making it a habit. I was coaching an executive recently who was really having a hard time connecting with people and was also, feeling kind of down on what was going on. And he started once a week, ending the week with writing a gratitude letter to somebody, a quick email. And that can really be as simple as, Tracy, this morning when you brought me a cup of coffee because you saw that I couldn't get out of the meeting and get it myself, it really made me feel supported, and I was so grateful that you're my colleague. Send. The end. That's all you need to do. Now, you can do this today. You could do it tomorrow. You should also try to think about how you can thank yourself. And again, what 3 things can you write down that you're grateful for each day? With a team, I would encourage you, someone said, what catch people doing something right? What went well this week? We can anchor meetings very well. A lot of times we start with what's worse, and at the end we go, any shout outs? Try starting with the shout outs. That's what I do when I'm running a meeting. I say, okay, we're going to start. We have 5 minutes, as many shout outs as we can get. So how can we get things, going well? And you'll start to see that people actually will be more creative and positive through the rest of the meeting because you've sort of anchored them to positivity. You can also ask your team to think about who they can thank and catch each other doing something good. All right, so we've covered sleep, exercise, mindfulness, and gratitude. Now, if you look at scientific research, those are the only 4 things that we can actually prove can increase what's called subjective well-being, what you probably call happiness. Those are the only 4 things, besides medication actually, that can do that. And all 5 of those are important, but 4 of them we can talk about today and we can use in the workplace. And then there's one other area that I think is important as leaders. We are going to send a follow-up document article that looks at those 4. But when we're talking about this in this setting, I also like to talk about this one other study to leave you with. When we're talking about making meaning, the study that they did at Duke that Dan Ariely ran really comes to mind for me. And what they did was this very interesting study, and they had these kits, not these exact ones, but similar to the ones you see on the screen. And so maybe they took in Meg's group. I see Meg's on the call. And so maybe Meg gets in here, and she's part of this first group. There were 2 different ways that they ran it. And so Meg's group comes in, and they say, here's how this is going to work. You're going to build these little characters, and you can do that as long as you want. There will be diminishing returns. For the first one you build, you get $2. For the second one you build, you get $1.95. For the next, you get $1.90, so on and so forth. And you can keep building them all day long if you would like to. Eventually, you'll get to 0. You go as long as you want. So Meg and the people in her group got a blue character and built it. Would you like to build one another, again? Sure. Build a green one. Okay, sure. Here's your second set. Build a green one. Okay, great. Would you like to do it again? Sure, I'll make $1.90. Get a yellow set. Build that. By the end, that people in that group on average had built about 13 little figures, had them lined up across the desk, and then they eventually said, all right, you know what, I think I'm finished with this. Thanks so much, went home. Then they ran it again, and they ran it a different way. The way they ran it this time was they said, would you like to build it? Same rules apply. Okay. People built the little blue character here. And maybe, maybe it's Regina and her group. So Regina builds the blue character. Terrific. You want to build it again? Sure. Here's another set. Build a green character. Okay. You want to build it again? Oh, I'd love to. $1.90 sounds good. They knocked down the blue character, put the pieces back into the box, and said, here you go, build it again. And then people looked a little puzzled, and they said, okay, do you want to build another? Sure. All right. They knocked down the green character, put all the pieces in the box, build it again. People in that group, building the same, essentially, characters, built on average 7. They stood to gain as much money, but they built about half as many little figures. Why do you think that happened? Rishikesh wrote, because they felt their work was not valued, no meaning, no challenge. These are coming in quick, knocked them down as a pointless activity. Work was devalued. And you're all right. Now, they weren't accomplishing anything, Beth said. Now, what I first thought when I read about this was, well, I don't think those people who built 13 of these characters felt that their characters would be encased in glass, put there for everyone to see, saved forever, all their work, really wonderful work of building these little people. They're building little figures that they know at the end of the day is going to be knocked down. But as you've all pointed out here, the work was taken apart, it was pointless, there was no reward, and it just felt purposeless. And what Dan Ariely wrote was, if you're a manager who really wants to demotivate your employees, destroy their work in front of their eyes. Or if you want to be a little subtler about it, just ignore their efforts. So what I'd encourage you to do is think about times that you might be guilty of this, we all are, or times when you've seen this happen, when you might accidentally be demotivating people by either destroying work in front of their eyes or maybe just ignoring it. Think about how many times you might have worked really hard on something, sent an email off to your boss, and crickets. You don't get any response. That can be really demotivating. Now, you as the boss might have had that happen to you as well, and you might not realize that there's a million reasons why you couldn't get to it. Maybe you didn't get enough sleep, or maybe you're trying to get more sleep. But if we're ignoring people's efforts or destroying their work, if someone works on something and then you say, oh, I forgot to tell you, we've moved in a new direction. That happens to everybody. But what we want to make sure that we're doing is letting people understand that their work is important. So I very rarely like to repeat myself, but I'm going to say this twice because I think it's one of the most important tenets of leadership that I can share. And that's that the people on your team at work are spending the majority of their waking hours in service of the agenda that you have set. Even if the agenda has been shared with you from on high, the people on your team are spending most of their waking hours working towards the goals that you have set. And it's important and it's incumbent upon you as a leader that you help them to connect meaning, that you share success stories, that you get back to them with how things are going, that you update them and you are communicative, that you share efforts that you make strong efforts that are noticeable to help motivate them so that they really are motivated in terms of the work that they're doing. And this applies at home as well. This is very important at home as well, not just do it because I said so, but do it because this contributes to a better life for everyone in this house. So those are the 5 areas that we're going to talk about today. We talked about sleep, exercise, mindfulness, gratitude, and making meaning. And we're going to close out. I hope that was a helpful recharge for you. We covered quite a bit in not a lot of time. But the thing that we'll end with here is what we like to say, neurons that fire together wire together. If we continue to do these things, if you start any one of these practices, you will eventually make this a habit. This will eventually come naturally to you. I'm glad we're doing this in January. You might have forsaken your resolutions already, but now is a great time to pick a 30-second to 26-minute intervention and start doing that every day. As Aristotle said, not recently, a very long time ago, we are what we repeatedly do, and I hope you'll be selective about what you do to not only do well, but to do good. So thank you for plugging in with us today, and we have 5 minutes for questions here.
Thank you. Wonderful session, Jessica, and so much interaction in the chat. Love it. So we are open for some questions now. I think we had one earlier. Um, let's see. When I had a bad day, I just want to let go of it, but I find that others in my life tend to bring the topics back up. Do you have any tips for helping other people let go of things without seeming aloof?
Hi. Yes. There are a number of things that you can do. I think the first one obviously would be to possibly share with them, why this is important to you. You could share with them some research. We do a lot of work here on influence, so thinking about how they might be influenced is obviously what I should be telling you here, and that's because that is the best thing to do. If you find that they're very data oriented and they go over things over and over because that's the data in front of them, give them a study on that. I'd recommend Nick Petrie's work on rumination. That can be really helpful and very persuasive to share with somebody. Another thing that you can do is just let them know that, this is not necessarily the best way to help me. And you can use our SBI model for that. You can say, when we're in this situation and you bring this up for me, the impact on me is that I actually feel more stressed. And you can then allow for the fact that, they might be trying to help you in the best way that they can. They might be someone who they might like to go over something until they've solved it. And you might just say, right now, I appreciate you putting in the time and effort to try to help me figure this out. I really do. And what would be best for me tonight would be to watch episodes of New Girl or watch Fleabag or go out to dinner and talk about anything else that might be really helpful for me right now. Could we try that? And so that's one thing that you can do. Now, if this is something that you feel is more of like an anxiety-based problem, and that can certainly be, it's a very, very common issue. That might be a separate conversation and just something to talk about with someone. So I'd encourage you to try to figure out how much of an issue is this? Is this just their way of helping you, or is this born out of something that maybe you can help them with?
I'm Gabby. Are there other countries who split the business day to allow employees for a longer lunch and encourage sleep? Are there any studies on whether that increases employee productivity and morale?
All right. Sorry, I'm trying to unmute so that I don't get a reverb from Tracy. Yes, there's a lot of different ways that cultures approach these topics. One that comes to mind is, I guess, 15 years ago, I was in China for a good while doing some work, and while I was in Beijing, I had a number of meetings with government officials, and I walked through this whole complex, and it took like 15 minutes to get to the room from the front door of the building of the gentleman I was going to be meeting with, and we walk into his office for our meeting, and he shuts the door, and there's his desk, and there's a bed. And I thought, oh my goodness, I don't know that I feel completely comfortable with this meeting. And I said, hi, is this the right room for us to be meeting in? He said, yes, this is my office. I said, I notice you have a bed here in your office. And he said, yes, I work 16 plus hour days. How could I possibly do that without napping? And he looked at me like I was a total crazy person. We ended up having a great meeting. We've continued to stay in touch for many years. But I use that as an example to illustrate the fact that the idea of not napping to this person was just bizarre. That how could you possibly think that I would be at my best through these kinds of grueling days without napping? And that's antithetical to a lot of businesses I've been in that have just as long days. The idea of napping is a sign of weakness. And so, we've seen a lot of nap pods being put into companies because of this research. We do know that, as the NASA study shows, that alertness will improve, performance will improve, all of the good things that we talked about with more sleep will then come to fruition. What I would also say, there is a lot of research, so if you like to email me or you can Google the different ways that people see this. There are countries where people take siestas. There are countries where people go on month-long holidays, and that's to be expected. And so there are a lot of different examples we could talk about. I want to make sure we have time for one more question, I think, with Tracy. And so I'd encourage you to look into that and figure out what way you can start to share that with your team or start to employ some of those techniques in small and large ways. That could just be taking a breathing break and closing your eyes for a moment. That could be, locking your door and using the the couch for a brief nap.
Jessica mentioned, we've reached the end of our time here, but as Jessica mentioned, we will go ahead and send any other questions that you have. We've posted Jessica's email address, and she has graciously asked you to reach out to her directly. But thank you, Jessica, for sharing the importance of fostering and developing resilient leadership in order to help you reach your full potential, both personally and professionally. We're saying don't forget to download the article that we've posted, How to Reach Your Full Potential, from Jessica. And we will be sending a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the recording and the course resources. We look forward to your attendance at a future webinar. As you exit the webinar, we hope you'll take a moment to complete the evaluation so that we continue to make these alumni events well worth your time. You can request that a CCL team member follow up with you as well. Again, thank you for joining us.
Thank you all so much. We know you're very busy, and we really appreciate you taking the time. Have a great day.
All right. Thank you, everyone. This actually concludes today's webcast. Thank you all for attending. We will send all registrants an email tomorrow with a link to the recording. And please visit our event calendar to sign up for future webcasts.